Why is because the obvious reason is because of very high suicide rate. That's basically it, really.
Yeah, and as I was explaining to you, John, part of why even, we started off at one name, but we've eventually ended up as People's Internet Radio, and part of how that came about was through suicide of a lot of guys I knew in the building trade. At one stage, I think it was 9 guys I knew of, some I knew very well, and it seemed that they were dropping like flies. As we were progressing through on the radio, suddenly we got to know a lot of taxi guys, and taxi guys were huge figures for suicide. Huge.
It's something that's not going to go away easily unless people go along and change their attitude towards men. It's that simple. Basically, the way we treat men in our society is nothing short of disgraceful. All across media, if you look at any of the soaps, the way men are portrayed in soaps, it's just disgusting. It really is. I mean, they always look like stupid buffoons, or they look like they haven't got a clue. It's just, I mean, if you're looking for a role model in life, looking at the media is the worst possible place for any kid, any teenager to look. I don't think there's any. I can talk an awful lot about this, but at the end of the day, it's so many people have to actually understand how truly dreadful the whole thing is. Paul, would like to say something?
Yes, my name is Paul Carr. I'm a blogger. I have a website, paulcarr.wordpress.com.
Sorry, Paul, can you come a little bit closer to your microphone, please?
Sorry. My name is Paul Carr.
Much better, thank you.
I'm a blogger. I have a website at paulcarr.wordpress.com. I am a men's rights activist. Until the beginning of this year, I was a feminist. And then I went to YouTube and I watched a video of Warren Farrell and Aaron Pizzey and Steve Brule, and it really blew my mind. And I realized that feminism basically does not cater for the men's issues. And I realized that I had to explore beyond what feminism was providing to look at the issues that are affecting men, such as John explained, the suicide ratio, which is in Ireland is now over 5-1, such as the high ratio of workplace fatalities and injuries, such as the 5 years less shorter life expectancy that men have to women. The feminists say that we live in a misogynist society, but the facts suggest that we live in the opposite. We live in a misandric society where men are undervalued and boys. And I watched this YouTube video and of these gender studies expert, Warren Farrell, Aaron Pizzey. He founded the first women's shelter in Europe, and they discussed these issues that feminists who have the airwaves, it has to be said, in Ireland and elsewhere, do not address. And I met John and I met the other folks here, and we have become good friends, and we have and this has been a journey for me, an inner spiritual journey to find myself as a man that feminism failed to provide. That's all.
Well, initially, Paul, I mean, you just made a couple of small points there, if I can just go back to. When you started off by saying initially you were a feminist, or you became a feminist supporter, is that what you said?
Well, no, I was by default a feminist all my life.
By default. Oh, pardon me.
This was the ideology that we are all inured in, from childhood. And, it basically, issues such as fathers' rights, such as equal parenting for fathers and mothers, issues such as, suicide, the high rate of suicide for men that's swept under the carpet.
Yes.
And so I realized at the beginning of this year that feminism was limited in addressing human relationship matters, the relationships between men and women, and that we need to find a balance between all of us, men and women, in our society. That because men and women are meant to complement one another, we're not meant to be at war with one another. And unfortunately, feminism is promoting a war between men and women.
Well, that is the point. I think that, you know, I'd really like to make clear here tonight, because none of you guys would consider yourselves anti-feminist as such, but you're pro, if you will, equalitists. Is that a better expression? I mean, you're not anti anybody. You're just trying to be for men to bring up to the level of what you'd consider some type of equality. Is that a fair?
Well, Vincent, I'm anti a certain kind of feminism. I'm anti state feminism. Gender feminism, which basically says that gender is a social construct, that men and women are basically the same, that we don't have different brains, I think that there's a certain kind of corrosive feminism that gets a lot of state funding. For example, Women's Aid and the the women's shelters that are funded by the state, but there's no men's shelters funded by the state. I mean, that is the consequence of this ideology of gender feminism and this ideology of this supposed patriarchy that is supposedly oppressing women, for which no evidence is offered.
Well, am I correct when I say that this idea of this gender-neutral existence has been disproved by psychiatrists and psychologists, but somehow the political ideologists seem to have grasped hold of it and they're not letting it go? Is that a fair assessment?
That is correct, and there has been many studies which prove that on the first day of a baby's life, there's a difference between baby boys and baby girls. On the first day, it has been observed that a baby girl would look at a picture of a face, and a baby boy would look at a picture of an object. And that's the tendency. There's exceptions, but this is the reality. At 2 months in utero, boys undergo a testosterone flush in the uterus, and they're already different when boys and girls are born. And that's the reality that feminists like to sweep under the carpet and disregard.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I'm a father of, I have a daughter and I have sons, and I absolutely agree that there's absolutely a difference from the get-go. Absolutely. You would have a hell of a time trying to convince me otherwise.
Yeah, but again, this kind of feminist ideology, this state feminism, this gender feminism, basically denies this, and they claim that there's a social construct, that gender difference is a social construct, and this is denial of the facts of the studies that have been done. There was another study done by Dr. Lipa in Los Angeles of 53 countries, of people working in 53 countries. It was found that across all the countries, regardless of culture, women tended to choose jobs that were socially related, such as social work, nursing, teaching, and so on. Whereas men chose jobs relating to systems and machines and organizing stuff, such as computer studies, engineering, and so on. I mean, this is clearly not a function, a gender difference are not a function of society. It's a function of biology to a large extent. And
a pre-tuning, rather, as you say, in the womb. I mean, I've done quite a bit of studying on some other aspects of this to do with, I mean, even for example, the length as a man, if you're born male, the length of certain fingers is controlled apparently by how much testosterone you're exposed to in the womb. And that can lean you in a certain way as a man. You know, it can, for example, some of the skill sets you were talking about there, it can make you more prone to, say, the engineering end of things as it would as a man to, say, intellectual engineering as opposed to, say, mechanical and engineering and physical.
Yes, but the problem is in our society, feminism, we're basically taught to value the feminine qualities as opposed to the masculine qualities. We're supposed to talk to one another to solve our problems rather than meet each other shoulder to shoulder, which is the way men do it. that's discouraged. And so we need to get a balance between the genders.
So if I were to ask you, I mean, even as a group, if anybody else wants to come in, feel free. As a group, perhaps, would anybody care to suggest, how long it took for this situation to come about, and was it purposefully driven that way, or has it just, is this a headless blunder, do you think, or has this been steered in this direction?
This has definitely been steered. This has been coming from the 10 years doctrine come in the late 1800s, when we moved from a position where men would have had control of the children on a separation because they had the money, but then they brought this doctrine in that stated that children must stay with their mother and the man must then therefore pay for the upkeep. And then it all sort of spread out from then that women took control slowly of pretty much every facet of life, and they still complain about the gender pay gap whenever we have had the first discrimination against women in the Workplace Act was in the early 1900s, and from the 1960s and 1970s we've had full gender pay, legally obligated things, but they still harp on about this. And this has all just been a constant chipping away, where they have, it's cultural Marxism, where they have found small items and blew them out of any form of proportion, and just said, you just need the recompense for this, and this is just how they went about it.
And do you think, sorry, this is a 42, folks.
That's 40, sorry.
And do you think that, for example, that when you say, that it's a social engineering, as I said, are you going with who are you suggesting is behind this, and what was driving that purposeful idea? What was the mindset that was driving it, if you catch my drift?
Whenever you get to the basis of it links in with cultural Marxism, where at the end of the Second World War, whenever the Russians found out that their Marxism wasn't going to expand past Russia, they created all these victim groups, which were female immigrants, disabled people, and so forth. And what they did was they decided these groups would rail against the government, and that's where feminism got its real political clout from. As part of a collective of other groups that were also doing the same thing. And whenever the feminist movement got really big in the 70s, it was all intellectual, political, college people that were running it, and it wasn't the ordinary woman in the street. And to be totally honest with you, whenever the ordinary women on the street find out what feminism is actually doing and saying for them, they don't want anything to do with it.
Well, I think that's a very valid point, because I think initially this whole idea, I remember, I'm 45-ish or thereabouts, and I remember a time in Ireland when I was a young lad hearing, for example, certain school teachers, when they got married, they had to leave their job, which I always thought was a bit crazy. But then I also remember the other side of that coin too, whereby, there was expectations for a man and expectations, and they were a completely different set of expectations work-wise.
The expectations that are put on a man are absolutely crazy. We are led to believe that men have forever and a day been running the world to the betterment of man, the detriment of woman. Yet we notice that whenever the Titanic sunk, these privileged men were the ones that had to go out drinking seawater. We know that from the age of chivalry, it's quite appropriate for a man to take off his clothes and lay it down across a puddle so that a woman can walk across it. We know that whenever a man wants to marry a woman, he gets down on his knees and offers gold and jewels. And for a group of people that have claimed that they were treated like chattel, like slaves, I've never heard of anybody dueling to the death over their slave. It's absolutely ludicrous.
That's actually an interesting point. Yeah, I never actually thought about that one. You're right.
There has been a difference to the way men and women have behaved, but the overlying male traits have been to protect the women. Men have got a gender role of protect and provide, That's why it's 98% of women, or 98% of men that die during a war, because the women are kept out of it. The gender roles that women got were always less dangerous, and they always existed in that way so that the women could be protected. It's not, you don't see very many women scaffolders. You don't see any women down in mines. All this type of stuff, but it's all just sort of swept away. And there is some sort of a social, and what women are saying is because of all these years that they have been oppressed by being allowed to stay in the house with their babies, where it's nice and safe, as opposed to going and doing dangerous occupation, they need to be recompensed for that. And the idea is just ludicrous.
Right, but don't you think that, are you coming at it from the perspective that the idea was that somehow, if we get the woman out of the house and get her working, we get to get control of the children's education, and of course we now have another taxpayer.
The idea of getting women out and getting them working was to it wasn't men in general that produced that. That was governments and that was cultural.
That's what I mean. I mean that has its source in the higher echelons, if you will, of the so-called intellectuals that control and manipulate these so-called think tanks, etc. It's not men and women that had decided this.
No, it was feminist women that decided that they need to get them out and get them working.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if anybody else wants to come in, please feel free, because, I mean, I know that almost no married couple I know for the last 10, 20 years decided that they, that the wife would work for the fun of it. They had to. She had no option. I mean, it became impossible for a man, basically, to hold a job down that would provide for him and his family. It just doesn't exist.
I'd like to come in.
Please do, Anne.
Yeah. I've been quite active within the men's movement for quite some time, but only recently a member of the Men's Human Rights Island. I'm the mother of sons and also a daughter, and I really felt that part of my history was I was an equalities officer for a trade union for quite some time. And I was looking at gender equality on all the different pages from in the Trade Union Congress. And I thought, this is all about women's issues. There's nothing about men. Even though over 90% of men get serious injuries or fatal injuries within the workplace, it was all the gender issues were all about women. And I thought, this can't be right. But in Wales, we've recently had proposed legislation ending violence against women. And when I saw this, I was absolutely furious. I thought, of course we want to end violence against women, but we want to end violence against men as well. I attended all the public consultations. I read the Task and Finish Group report. And one of the comments in the Task and Finish report absolutely put me over the edge. It says masculinity is associated with violence in most cultures, and Wales is no exception. I mean, they were talking about my dad, my husband, my sons, and my grandsons, and I thought, how dare they? So I was on a mission to try and change this, and really at the 11th hour they changed it. They changed the title of the bill to gender-based violence, domestic abuse and sexual violence. So I saw that as a victory. But getting back to feminism and the role that it took, we needed a movement. Women needed the vote. Women needed a voice. And I really think in the 80s, then we got equality. And I think since then, the gender pendulum have swung too far. I really think men are really suffering. Family courts is a huge example.
Oh, family courts are horrendous. We know an awful lot about what goes on in family courts here. I mean, just I don't know if you're aware, the impetus of our radio station on the internet here is our tagline, if you will, is seeking solutions, you see. So we're not a hang 'em high website. We're interested in passive, effective solutions that are for everybody.
Passive effective, I mean, it's raising awareness, isn't it? And this is what I think the men's human rights movement in Ireland is doing. You know, that they are raising awareness. Here in Wales, I've linked with lots of other men's groups, I'm a volunteer for Families Need Fathers, Both Parents Matter, and it's all about raising awareness. And I really think there are so many issues that I see men are now discriminated against, especially domestic abuse. That there is very little provision for a male victim.
Would you agree, perhaps, that the feminist movement, and again, I'm not trying to bash the feminist movement here, but would you agree, perhaps, that the feminist movement tends to imply violence as a male issue?
Yeah, absolutely. They do not see women as perpetrators of violence.
No, but they also seem to think, correct me if I'm wrong, if there's a feminist listening and they want to call in, by all means do so. We will accept calls in the third hour of the show if anybody wants to call in with a question or a comment, and I'll give out the number. But a very valid point made by a very interesting guy online. He's a philosopher called Stefan Molyneux, and he made the point, he said, well, if violence is a male issue only, and if it's only men that have to deal with it, he said, you know, that seems to be a logical fallacy to me. He said, because, you know, men are generally, young boys are taken care of by women 90% of the time.
Absolutely.
They're schooled by women generally up to the ages of about 12, 80% of the time. And, you know, he was basically making the argument that how can male violence that they say is coming through, you know, through the youth, etc., how can that be a male-only issue? He said, because most likely they're not really seeing their fathers that much. And then when you consider the amount of broken homes, single-parent families, and, you know, quite often in Ireland, the term single-parent family, I would imagine it's heavily weighed towards, that means a woman and their child or children, and not a father and children.
Is heavily weighed in Wales as well, absolutely. It's like 59% of households in certain areas with children are run by mothers only.
I wonder, would you have any figures on the prison population? Because I heard here, for example, that the male prison population in Ireland is something like weighed 75% of the male population in prison at the moment came from single-parent families. Or only raised by a mother.
I haven't got stats available at the moment, but I could certainly provide them later.
Well, would that surprise you, that figure?
Sorry?
Would that figure surprise you?
Not at all. No,
right,
not at all.
Right.
No. And the length of sentences, everything is, you know, it discriminates against men. Well,
I found an article earlier on that was in the Huffington Post in relation to that. Men sentenced to longer prison terms than women for same crime, study says, and that's assuming the women are actually convicted at all. And I'll put a link to that article into the chat box there for you if you want to have a look at it.
I did see that same article from today. Yeah.
Well, I'm just putting it into the chat box for the listeners on the site there as well. And what do you, I mean, I don't know, does anybody else want to come in on that? Anybody else like to throw an opinion on that particular aspect of things?
There's a woman in America who glassed a man last week. It's her 18th offence for violence, and she's not going to jail.
She smashed the glass in his face.
Yeah, smashed the glass in his face. Could well be attempted murder. She's not going to jail. It's her 18th conviction for violence.
Wow.
I'll dig out a link for that, but it's it's just crazy.
Yeah, I think I caught a sight of that one as well, actually.
There was a woman up in Northern Ireland that went into the intensive care unit and attacked her husband, pulled out his strips and punched him, and she's still out walking about. There's none of this makes any sense.
And I don't know if David, are you in the call still?
Yes, I'm in.
You are indeed. Sorry, I mean, I just saw you sent me a message asking me to pull you in. I thought you were doing okay.
Yeah.
And we haven't really heard from you. Have you anything you'd like to pitch in with?
I would like to go back to the origins of the current discrimination against men. I would take it from the 70s when equality became a major issue in Western countries. At that time, there was a genuine reason for calling for equality, but so much equality legislation was provided by the European Union and in the US and other Western countries. But I feel at that point the radical feminists hijacked the whole women's movement, and they used it for their own purposes, and they used it to forward a very aggressive style agenda, which was aimed at discriminating against men. And so we had the current situation in the courts where, in the family courts where, men suffer when divorce proceedings are initiated. They suffer when separation is an issue, and they almost automatically lose the home in such situations, and then they have to provide maintenance as well. And this all has a very serious effect. I believe that this may well have a serious impact on the male suicide rate, for instance. The fact that
I think that's a fair point, and I also think there's a point that gets neglected. At least I found this to be neglected with a lot of the guys I knew in that situation, is that it affected them forming a new relationship with someone else, because women seem to be, even if they were interested in them, if they found out that they had a previous partner and they were making alimony payments or child support or whatever, they tended not to.
Yeah, they were no longer
them.
They were no longer as attractive.
Suddenly they became less attractive.
They had an anchor around them already.
Right.
But the other issues then, of course, access rights to children has been a huge matter as well, and it has affected men severely when they find that they do not get the access that they require. They do not get automatic. For instance, unmarried fathers do not get automatic guardianship rights even yet, and they suffer if there is an acrimonious split between the mother and the father. The man will suffer when custody comes up for this decision.
And just on that issue as well, do you think, I mean, this is something that's been in my mind in relation to this, as I was thinking about before you came on. Would any of you, maybe Anthony, maybe you hadn't heard from you, maybe you'd like to come in on this one.
Sure.
Do you think that the situation that surrounds all of this and all the legislation and, as you say, these other ideals, do you think that actually influences the pressure when a marriage or a long-term relationship is breaking up? Do you think that adds extra pressure to the relationship, and maybe that if it wasn't there, it wouldn't be as bad a breakup, or, you know?
Do you mean the having the sort of Damocles hanging over your head puts additional
Well, I mean, I
stress
think it's a fair point to say most men I know, in fact, not one I've said it to has disagreed with me so far, that, you know, if they were to contemplate for a moment the failure of their marriage or relationship, would they automatically adopt a position that they would think they were going to be the one fighting to get to see their children? And they all said yes.
Well, I would certainly agree that's a reality, isn't it? But are you asking whether that would be a contributing factor to the divorce in the first place?
Not a contributing factor to the divorce, but a contributing factor to the stress and the acrimonious nature that's brought about because of the way the divorce process happens. You know, people are pitched against one another. It's a battle, effectively. It's a battle. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a battle when it's acrimonious, when it goes wrong. I mean, a lot of divorces happen, and it's a reasoned discussion between two adults, and they can resolve it themselves. I mean, in the ideal world, it is the only problem. The problems arise where there is disagreement, and it has to resort to the court. So we're looking at divorces here which have resorted to the courts and to legislation, which are already on the rocks anyway. If they weren't, they wouldn't be in court in the first place.
Right, that's a very interesting point. 42 was just typed into the chat box there. He's saying it's a big factor in keeping abused males in a relationship. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's often heard. My life wouldn't be worth living, you know, type of thing, when referring to their wives. And it's certainly a part of our culture, and it has been for, as far as I know, within all literature going back hundreds of years until it began. The scolded husband is an object of derision, to be laughed at rather than pitied or assisted. And being in that relationship means that you can't get out of it. And it's not something recent. This isn't something which has just popped up recently. It's been part of our lives in the Western world anyway, and in most other areas, going right back to the earliest days of marriage being created as an institution. Where the obligations are there, regardless of what happens. As soon as you sign off on it as a male, you're signing up for very serious commitment for the rest of your life. And as David was saying there, the problem of trying to find someone else, having been through divorce, is problematic, because there's a serious burden upon you, which the potential partner would be aware of. So there's less resources to offer to the new family, should you have one. Whereas the opposite will be true on the other side if you're in the receiving end of resources. I'm not that I'm saying that's a bad thing of itself. Certainly children do need to be taken care of, and by and large we are talking about child maintenance and various things. But there does seem to be a certain problem with putting the money into the mother's account for her sole use as she sees fit, which might not be in the best interest of the child in any given instance. I mean, by and large, we would imagine it should be, but it might not be. But as for this leading to to get back to suicides and things, which is an issue that the Men's Human Rights Ireland are very heavily involved with, that there's a very noticeable spike in the suicide rate correlating directly to divorce and the stresses involved in that, which seems to be ignored, which is odd, seeing as it's so obvious that the relationship between divorce and the stress which it involves, and it's not just an immediate stress, it's an ongoing thing. There's the loss of hope as well, because you're aware that this is something which is going to impact on you and your social relationships from here on out. You have changed fundamentally and profoundly. There's a change in the person's self-identity.
So am I right in thinking that, what you guys are about here is that you'd like to see that process is an equalised process? I mean, just so you know, I used to work in a 24-hour garage late at night in Dublin's, well, it was in Darndale actually, and I used to witness the battered wives used to come at night to use the phone at 4 and 5 a.m. and they'd have a string of children with them like a step of stairs. And it was absolutely heartbreaking, because I couldn't even give the phone out to them. I had to make the call, and she'd say something, I'd say it down the line. She'd say something, I'd say it down the line. I'd have to give and it was horrific, and sometimes they'd be standing there, as I say, like a set of stairs, and each one of them would be bleeding, and I couldn't even open the door to let them in. That's how bad things were at that time. But, again, we're about the solution, and that's why I don't want people to think we're, raging for one side and not the other. I mean, we're about a unification here and finding a solution and a remedy for this type of situation. And we're not seeing, at least I'm not seeing, anything that even remotely reflects that attitude, even within the legislative structure, anywhere.
Well, even the relationship...
I think an example of a solution would be an equal parenting mandate. I know that George Galloway, MP in Britain, brought forward a bill that was supported by about 120 MPs to bring an equal parenting mandate law introduced in the UK, which will mean that in the event of a divorce or separation, each parent will have roughly equal access and time to their children.
Well, it seems to be the only relationships that starts in equality and finishes in inequality.
Well, I think that a joint parenting mandate would, because at the present time, what we have is the default is that the mother gets custody, and in Ireland it's about 90%. Women after divorce or separation are the primary caregiver in about 90% of families, of single parent homes. And so I think we need a joint parenting mandate from the top down that will adjust that, because at the end of the day, this is about the best interests of the child and the children. And studies show, psychological studies show, that when the children has at least 35% access to each parent, then there's less chance that he or she will develop pathologies later in life, such as alcohol abuse, drug abuse, poor academic achievement, suicidal tendencies, teen pregnancies, and so on. Studies show that the best family unit is a two-parent situation, a two-parent intact family, or two adoptive parents. This is the best family arrangement for children. And so the joint parenting mandate would fit in with that, and would put the child's interest at the top of the agenda.
Has anybody ever successfully argued that, that is not an ideal situation?
Sorry?
Sorry, I think is my microphone on again, is it?
Hello?
Yes.
I think...
I think the microphone is...
It's my microphone, guys. I'm going to have to swap to a different microphone. Can you give me 2 seconds?
I'm very quiet there.
Just give me 2 seconds, folks. Sorry.
Working away.
If you can keep going, guys, I'm going to swap.
What's happening, John, with that? There's a report was made to submission to the NOSP from you guys.
Yeah.
I saw it on the website.
Yes, Anthony. That was sent in early
Harry.
June. Harry, that was sent in early June, but there hasn't been any word back so far. We don't expect to hear for some time yet, I would imagine. It would take some time to digest all the information that has been sent in, because we think that there were quite a large number of submissions. At least that's a feeling. But we would expect that it will take some time before they do come back and hold hearings, if they do decide to hold hearings, which is another issue that I don't know if it has been decided. Maybe John can say something about that. I don't know if they've decided to actually hold hearings.
I don't know yet.
Okay, I should be back now. You should be hearing me okay now, yeah?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I had to swap microphones there. These things happen.
But the details of the submission itself, which we were just talking about, the
Sure.
submission made to the National Office of Suicide Prevention by the Men's Human Rights Ireland group. And I think John has got the best knowledge of it and the preparation of that and being sent in. It's quite a big document. I think it's 6, 7, 8 pages with a lot of issues of how to begin looking at suicide, particularly in respect to the gender bias within it, like 5-to-1 ratios. Is there any points and any highlights of that there, John, that you could just outline, because to give us a good idea of what it's all about, what the submission was?
Basically, what we've asked is that our government go along and look at suicide as a gender issue instead of just being suicide. I mean, with the rates of suicide being well over 5-to-1, what we think is that to have it just looking at why it is that so many men are killing themselves, not so much the end result, but why it is that they get to that point where they feel so unwanted in our society that they end up killing themselves. That's essentially the idea behind the submission we made. I also would like to point out the likes of Robin Williams recently, who killed himself, unfortunately. It's been suspected that it was due to the immense financial pressure put onto himself by 2 failed marriages.
Yeah, I think what happened with Robin Williams was he had 2 failed marriages. He had one wife getting half of everything. He had another wife getting half of everything, and that left nothing for Robin Williams. There was another high-profile suicide over in America, a guy called Chris Mackney, who his wife hounded him through the child courts with, and to be totally honest with you, I would say the way child courts or child courts and divorce courts are working now, I class that as state-sanctioned domestic abuse that continues beyond the relationship. There's little to no option for a man to have access to his kids. You also find that whenever family splits up, the man moves out, the woman will remain staying in the house. The man is still responsible for the mortgage. He also walks out with any credit card debt, any personal loans, and the basic day-to-day running of the house. However, they don't look at what he's supposed to use to live for himself. Personally speaking, I came out of a 25-year abusive relationship, and I was left out of my monthly pay with in and around about £100 a month that I was supposed to find accommodation, eat, clothe myself, get petrol for her to go back and forward to work. It just doesn't work, and there's nobody that in any of that system, in the divorce courts, and there's not even a shelter you can go to that is attempting to help any of that. And if people are believing that does not contribute to men deciding to kill themselves, there's something wrong with their head.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Sorry.
Yeah, can I come in on the
please do, David. Yeah, please do.
Submission, our submission to the National Office of Suicide Prevention. I think it's worth mentioning that we looked at statistics for Scotland, and Scotland has had a great deal of success in reducing the male-female suicide ratio. Theirs was a good deal higher about 10, 12 years ago, but they have succeeded by focusing on men, by programs which focus on men, particularly young men. They go to soccer clubs and other places where young men congregate and talk. They talk to them, they find out their problems. They have actually brought the suicide ratio down below 3-1. And if you compare that with our ratio, which is more than 5-1, it's quite extraordinary. It beggars belief that...
Well, have you heard this idea that's been put forward to, a suggestion rather, to put lithium into the water supply?
No, I haven't heard that.
That was on the Irish media. You've heard that one, Anthony, have you?
No, or Harry, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Harry, pardon me, sorry.
No, what does lithium do? Was it supposed to calm you down or something?
It calms the population down, yeah. Now, this is the Irish water supply. There was a call to put lithium into the Irish water supply. Because
is this the same reasoning as putting fluoride into the water to stop us getting rotten teeth, even though we brush our teeth? Supposedly, yeah. Well, I mean, the drop-off or the improvement in dental hygiene in Ireland had a direct and corresponding improvement in people's dental health.
To be honest with you, I have often felt, yeah, absolutely. I've often felt if you just brushed your teeth alone with just a plain toothbrush with plain water, you'd probably...
Yeah, it would have an impact, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I wanted to ask, does the reduction in suicide in Scotland, it was an overall reduction in suicide in total numbers?
It was,
right.
It must have been, because the suicide ratio for women, as far as I recall now, it stayed more or less the same, but the suicide ratio for men dropped from a higher one down below 3-1 in the last census, and this must mean that the overall suicide rate has fallen.
Must have dropped as well, yeah.
And I think as somebody mentioned already, it was also observed that there was a higher suicide ratio among men who were either going through divorce or who had gone through divorce proceedings. So that points out that there is some kind of connection there. One wonders why the powers that be haven't actually focused on this already.
Yeah. Well, it should. I mean, part of your submission, sorry, am I talking over someone?
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
May I go ahead? Part of your submission, I clicked it online there. I'm just looking at it. Took extracts from the Young Men and Suicide Project, which is a fairly involved report on the issues that you're talking about there. And it says clearly that there should be an increased focus on working among young boys and prevention among young males. It's unequivocal, and it's underpinned by strong evidence based, and a clear policy mandate is required. So this has been provided already to the government. The report is a publicly available thing. Why is it that this isn't? Why does it require? Do you feel? Why does it require such a submission to the suicide prevention, the Office of Suicide Prevention, when it's so obvious to anyone who does a report or looks into it?
Quite extraordinary, Harry. We looked at a figure given by, I think, Irish Medical Council or somebody back in the 1970s. In the mid-70s, the ratio was 2.3-1, and then it increased in the mid-90s to about 4-1, and now apparently it's more than 5-1. So it's quite amazing that this situation has been allowed to continue untrammeled, and nobody, the powers that be, haven't taken steps to remedy it.
And can I come in there as well, David? Just to put this to the group as well. I mean, the figure that's been quoted there, 5-1. where I suspect I'm going to call these hidden suicide figures. We're hearing of, single car crashes happening on clear roads at night, single driver. Swimming, drownings, people getting hit by trains, industrial accidents, but...
I have an explanation for those for you.
Okay, please do.
Here's what we know. Here's what we know as facts. We know that in 1970 there were 73 suicides in Northern Ireland, 43 men, 30 women, which is 58%. Men, 42 women. In 2012 we had 215 suicides, 278 suicides, 215 men, 63 women. That's up to 77%. So we know that something has changed within society. In that time, what we know that's changed is in 1971, Aaron Pizzey brought in the shelters and there was refuges for women, and the way women have been portrayed in the media has changed. Women have become more stronger and dominant. What we also know is that we're at a situation now where most people, if they're sensible and they've got a mortgage, they will have insurance for the mortgage.
So I was going to go there next because I think the assumption is that men are making, seemingly when they're committing suicide, is that they think that if they do it correctly, inverted commas, the mortgage will be written off and the family will be okay.
The mortgage will be written off, the family will be okay, their insurance will pay out and everything will work. I would say that now, if what we also know about all these people that are committing domestic abuse, the sociopaths, is that they do not like taking responsibility for their actions. They also would rather have somebody else do their dirty work for them. And if they can convince their husband, partner to top himself, that's a very clean way out for them. It also makes them money. And it's a win-win-win for everybody apart from the man.
Well, it's quite interesting you mentioned that. I actually suspect I know somebody who may have been in that position. But I can't prove anything, of course. It's just a suspicion.
What happens is, after we have a suicide, whenever we try to figure out what was the cause of it, we go to their immediate family. Hands up anybody that thinks that their ex-partner is going to say, yeah, I told him to kill himself. It's not going to happen.
No, but as I said...
my
gut feeling is telling me that's what happened, but of course I can't prove anything.
Yep, I was told once a year I got a letter in from my employer which sort of stated out what I was worth there, and about 2 weeks after, I had this actually not at the tail end of an argument, but an actual proper conversation which went along the lines of, you love me and you love our kids and we're in all this debt, and if you died, it would sort out all the problems.
Is it a case that it's presented as if one of us were to die?
Yeah.
It's still planting a seed.
No, she was never offering her down. It was, go you off, commit suicide, make it look like an accident and we'll be all fine. And, that happened every year around about 2 weeks after the letter about the insurance and all come in. It is absolutely nuts. And I'm not saying that all these single vehicle deaths or drownings and stuff are connected to that, but I think there's a good proportion.
Yeah, it's a horrible thing to think of. I mean, that would actually occur between two people who at some point must have loved each other.
I think what's even worse to consider there, Harry, is the fact that if what I know about insurance companies is correct, if they suspect anything, they will not pay out.
Yeah.
Oh, indeed. Yeah. That's the irony of it. But they say that I don't think it's quite a recent thing. As you were talking there, it reminded me of a line from a film, It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. From back in the 40s, where there was in the film, the character is presented with a situation where he understands that he's worth more dead than alive to his family because of whatever had been happening within the film. And then the film explains how he's made such a difference to the world and so on and so forth. And he finally goes through this arc and gets back with the family again to appreciate everything he has. But the film itself was culturally quite important at the time because there was high suicides then. After the 30s, into the 40s.
They were horrendous in America. Absolutely, after the Great Depression.
it's not a recent thing. This kind of idea of self-identifying as only having worth through what you can earn.
Would you agree it would be a modern industrialization recent event in humanity, that it would never have existed, if you will, before industrialization?
Oh, I think it would have been there all the time. I mean,
really?
the identity that men have.
Well, I mean, the men would have went to fight, perhaps. That was expected. Anne, I think, wants to make a point on that. Do you want to come in on that, Anne?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a huge problem in Wales. I think out of every 4 people that commit suicide, 3 are men. And a place sort of 20 miles away from where I'm living now had a huge suicide problem with young men. There's been lots of efforts to try and make changes. I really, because I was involved in the health service, mental health has always been a poor relation in the health service anyway. And there are so many barriers, I believe, for men presenting at an early stage. Men present at a crisis point to their GP, to their, to anywhere within the National Health. And I wonder how we can change this. One of the barriers we found in Wales was men are employed and working full time. They couldn't get access to their GPs. I think it may be slightly different in Ireland because we don't pay when we present, at a GP's. But there were loads of barriers there. I just wonder, is the problem worldwide? Are men committing suicide worldwide much more than women?
Well, I'd like to address something.
I don't know.
I'm probably in a unique position, along with some of the other hosts here on the radio, because we've been trying to help people with mortgage, credit card difficulties for approximately 5 years now. And this idea that men don't come forward and tell people how they're feeling, I can absolutely assure you that's not true. I have had at least 200 emails from other men, or messages on the line here saying, one, they've told us that if it wasn't for this very site and helping them to find solutions to deal with the situation, but they have told us they've all told me and others that they were going to commit suicide. And this idea that men won't come forward and say it, they will, I think, but they have to feel that somebody will actually listen to them.
That's exactly right, and maybe our men don't feel that presenting at a GPs with suicide tendencies, where it's got to get so bad, they may miss that opportunity.
Well, does anybody know? I mean, if you present to a GP, as you say, with suicidal tendencies, do they send you for counselling or give you medication? What's the more common?
I think Can I
please come in, Harry? Yeah.
Just step in? I think you do get recommended for counselling. That's the first step to assess, because the GP isn't qualified to give a proper assessment on that.
Okay.
Would recommend you to go through counselling, and then from there it would be seen from the psychiatrist, and the psychologist would then decide what's the best procedure to go. It's similar to anything. The GP would recommend you to any specialist.
And I'd be very curious to know, does anybody have any figures to suggest that, for example, if, say, 200 men are sent for counselling after they report these tendencies, and what the success rate is? Because as far as I can tell, our simple methods of helping people deal with debt seems to be extraordinarily successful. I would suggest our success rate is almost 95%. It's just actually offering, help. Sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Pardon me. Would I go ahead?
Please.
I was just going to say that the idea that men have a perception that they won't be listened to isn't simply a perception. It's a fact, and it's been experienced by all men from a very young age as part of your social conditioning, as opposed to simply being male. It's looked at in different ways. I mean, and just to use Robert Williams as an example, recently he's been all over the media. There's two different approaches to that. The one approach is to say that this is a man who's been suffering from depression his whole life, and it was going to happen. I mean, you can't blame somebody for killing themselves if they suffer from depression, because it's like blaming someone for dying from diabetes. It's not something that was within their control, and that the response to that is a kind of an oh dear, well, there's nothing something we could have done. Then the other side of it is to say that he was response to the immense pressures that were put on because of some financial arrangements. And it's a similar thing, that this is his value was presented as how much he could earn, or what his monetary value was, and that's how he perceived himself. And isn't it terrible that he perceived himself that way?
Isn't it still that way, that, you know, that the so-called, I mean, I know I have a young son who goes out to nightclubs, etc., and he needs to feel he needs to look a certain way. He needs to look like he's well-heeled, basically, to attract a mate.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. It's not a perception. It's constantly. It's
reinforced. You're correct. It's reinforced. It is reinforced.
It's not simply a perception. It's there. It's factual. It's something that exists, and that's constantly being backhanded out of the conversation again and again, as if it's not a contributing factor to it. That there is no listening involved when it comes to speaking out. I mean, wow. and the chap that was mentioned there, Chris Machney, and also Thomas Ball as well, another famous, not famous exactly. The reason why I'd mention it's because they're not famous at all. Thomas Ball was a guy in Canada who had been through the court system with the family court and had been stripped of everything, all of his assets, and he had spent his last dollar. And in frustration, finally, when he had nothing left and he was facing utter destitution, went down to the courts and he self-immolated in front of the court buildings. And it was reported in the local paper as someone attempted to set fire to the court building. That was how he was presented in his death. It wasn't reported upon in any other way. Didn't hit the international newspapers at all. And these and Chris Machney as well was just driven to it. And it just seems to be an avoidance of looking at what the problem is. But when men say this is the problem, it's not being listened to or not being addressed, or it's responded to in a different way by changing the framework of the argument or the discussion in some other way to give it a different understanding.
You know, I think there's another part as well that comes in, particularly, as I said, the building game was the one I had experience of, and I could see that a lot of men, suddenly their phone wasn't ringing, they'd no work, and suddenly they themselves, they seemed to feel they lost, I suppose, self-worth. They didn't feel worthy anymore. You know,
well, they did. It's not that they felt it. They did. Mm. That's the kind of point I was trying to make. It's not a perception from inside the individual. Mm. Because if you frame it that way, there's nothing can be done. You can't go inside someone's mind. That's how they perceive themselves. It's their problem.
Well, you see, again,
we perceive it, so it's our problem.
Well, I was in that position. You see, I went from a position where I was the breadwinner, and suddenly I became the full-time. I call myself jokingly to the kids, I'm the mammy. You know, I'm here 24/7, and my wife was working, and that's just the way it had to be. So I went from one environment and had to do a complete 180. And it was, I can't tell you, it was easy. It wasn't. There was a lot of pink socks and pink shorts floating around for quite some time.
Yeah, we've all done that.
Right. So,
but yeah, I mean, the worth that you have as a human being resides in you as a person and as a human being, not in what you can provide and what you can do and the services you can provide to the community and the wider society.
Well,
at large.
You see, that's where I'm going with this. Because you see, for me, getting online and becoming part of this radio, that was my saving grace, if you will. That's what helped me. I said, right, I'm going to try to help. I'm going to try to do something. I didn't even know really what I was trying to do, but I just knew I had to do something, and that I depended on it too.
Well, even in the doing of something, you shouldn't have to do that. You should not even need a purpose to provide a service to the wider community and to do something about a problem to give yourself purpose. You should have purpose as a human being, as an individual, intelligent, autonomous, self-actuating person.
Absolutely, but I'm just saying, at the time, you see, when somebody's, I understand when somebody's at that very low ebb, you know, that I just happen to have all the equipment and the wherewithal, and with some assistance from others, we got this thing off the ground. And I felt it gave me something. For example, what I'm trying to suggest here is that if anybody's listening, and if you're an out-of-work man in particular, go do something. Just do something. Work. Dig your garden and dig it every day if you have to. Do something. It does help.
Anything.
Yeah, it does help.
Yeah, I would just say
come
that.
Please,
go
Anne.
ahead. Sorry.
Please, Anne, come in.
Anne?
Go ahead, Anne.
Is she gone?
Have we lost Anne? Let me just double check there. Are you there, Anne? There we go,
I attended a men's conference in Brighton last year. Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I attended a men's conference in Brighton last year, and there was only 4 women there, but all different things were talked about on men and men's issues. But I was really, really pleased that there was somebody there from McAlpines, the McAlpines firm, that they sort of said that they recognise that there's so many people in the building trade were suffering from depression, having problems, and they had an on-site. In London, this was, I believe, an on-site counsellor. I thought, how forward-thinking is this? Identifying a problem really quickly and going with it. It was amazing. And getting back to Scotland and domestic abuse, there was a big movement in Scotland, and they've really done an awful lot around male victims of domestic abuse. It's going really, really well, and that could have had an impact on the drop in male suicides. It was a brilliant conference. I felt privileged to be there.
So what about the telltale signs? I mean, are they more? I think the perception is it's more difficult to spot in men. Is it? Would you agree with that?
Of suicide or abuse?
Of suicidal tendencies.
From what I've sort of gathered, what happens is people seem to be depressed for a while, and then all of a sudden it's like they've snapped out of it, and about 3 months later they just go and do it.
Would anybody care to comment on, the Irish politician? We don't need to use his name if you don't want to, but the recently deceased politician who chose that path. Does anybody have any insights on that?
Nope.
No.
Insights, no.
Or
tragedy.
I would like to just say something. I think we need to be pretty careful here, Vinny. But what I picked up was that he was under severe pressure at the time. He was from constituents. He was getting a lot of flack.
Yeah, sorry, Dave. I didn't mean on a personal level. I mean insight into the sense that, he was a political figure. He's the first one, I think, in Ireland that we know of, as far as I can tell, that died by suicide. Nothing seemed to come out from there based on that. If there was no, let's have some news conferences and what can we do about male suicide? It didn't materialise, did it?
No, you're right.
Do you understand the point I'm making? Whereas if it was I just can't help but feel if it was a high-profile female politician.
Yes.
Do you understand the point I'm making?
Yeah.
Gender switching test.
Right.
Well, women are more valued in society than men, I think. And you're right. If you do the gender switching test, and if it was a woman TD, then there would be a week of mourning. For this man for this male TD, it's yesterday's news.
Yeah, I mean, because it just seemed it was a big story and then gone overnight, disappeared, evaporated, no more.
But Vincent, can you imagine that again, if it was a woman that had committed suicide, that the whole array of women's groups who are state funded out there wouldn't be calling immediately for action? They would, of course, they would be camped outside the door calling for action on this issue. But there is no counterpart of the National Women's Council in this country. There's no council for men.
But that's the point I'm making, exactly. And there was no cause to form one either.
There wasn't, no. And there still hasn't been any recognition of the need, despite all the evidence that's coming out and that we're talking about here tonight. There still hasn't been any call and any recognition by a politician that such a body is needed. It seems to me that the power of the women's groups is so strong that politicians are scared of actually going across them in any way, of antagonizing them in any way.
And am I right in thinking it's been fairly common for the President of Ireland to be, I don't know if the term is patron or something like that, of the suicide prevention? In fact, I think it's, in fact, there we go. I think I just Googled it there. President Higgins to open World Suicide Prevention Day. And I think it wasn't Mary McAleese. And, sorry, I'm Googling here while I'm talking to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but as far as I know, McAleese was also, and even Robinson were ahead of that as well. And yet, you know, it seemed to be it's like it's a very quiet thing, you know.
Yes.
National Suicide Prevention it just doesn't seem to get much attention. And when you see the figures are 5-1 against,
exactly,
you know, and then we have a high profile male politician die by suicide, and nothing.
The other thing, of course,
it shows also that
it's always forgotten about. The other thing that's always forgotten about is the number of men who take their own lives by drink, drugs, or even drownings. I mean, drowning is not considered a suicide; it's considered a drowning. When you start adding all those up, it becomes far way beyond 5-1. There's also suicides are not always counted as suicides. Sometimes it's death by misadventure or open verdicts.
Yeah.
So basically, when someone says it's over 5-1, they're not counting all the times where a man or woman, for that matter, takes their own lives. Just something to bear in mind there.
And this recent, I'm going to call it a debacle again, with the death certificates. I mean, has anybody got an opinion on that, where they were going to say anybody who's died via suicide wasn't going to have it on their death certificates?
That too.
But it would still be recorded in the registrar.
I know,
anyway,
but
the death certificate itself wouldn't have it on it because it would be a constant reminder.
Well, you see, I know people say that, but
decide.
We see other people are saying, but if that's, you know, literally, if they're the facts, they're the facts. And I couldn't help but think that would have, you know, an effect in other areas.
Oh, like kind of a carpet, like a psychological under the carpet type response, which is now supported by the government rather than being discouraged.
Plus,
I think they should face the issues like head on as best as we can. But there is, the problem with suicide, and particularly if it's a public one, there is that very difficult balance to arrive at, where a lot of attention. I mean, there was a correlation between the amount of publicity that suicides receive, and also others will then follow follow suit. That's a concern as well. You know that it's a difficult one. But I think I would agree with what you were saying, if I understand you, that the idea that suicide has such a gender imbalance weighted against men, to phrase it that way, that it's not hitting any sort of political radar.
What I'm suggesting is, if that was to be the other way around.
Oh yeah, it would certainly make a massive difference.
As I said, and a high profile.
I would agree with you.
Absolutely, it would be on the news every day for a week. Now that point, 42 put in there: 6 months until you get assessment, 6 months from then until treatment, and then 6 sessions of cognitive behaviour therapy. Somebody's just put in the chat box here. Dahio, he said, I just found on Facebook, suicidal teen had to wait 5 weeks to see a psychiatrist after trying to hang himself last week, or that was the week previous to that, I'm assuming.
Oh,
wow! 6 weeks and already made an attempt.
And made an attempt.
Stay at home.
So yeah, I mean,
that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exactly why this petition that was made is needed. I mean, it needs as much support as it can get. That was made to have a spearheaded suicide prevention program, which is directed at males. To begin to look at the wider issue, specifics themselves, and have some particular facilities which are male orientated.
Yeah, and that's not a sexist statement, and it's not anti-feminist. I mean, that's one of the things.
It's looking at the reality
and
dealing with it. We want to reduce the number of deaths,
Yeah.
And every death, we're not saying like that, oh, it should be, I mean, equal. You know, we want everyone.
No.
We should reduce all deaths by suicide, and nobody should be faced with that horrible decision or be led to that in some way. But by ignoring this huge gender imbalance, it's not solving the problem.
How many of you would agree with the notion? And I'm seeing this notion bandied around an awful lot over the last year and a half, 2 years in particular, that at the root of maybe 80% of male suicides, just male suicides, seems to be heavy financial burdens, whereas we're not seeing that in, say, the other percentage of male suicides and the female suicides.
Yeah,
that will be part of it. But the other part is just basically what we have on a constant basis looking around us is that fathers are not needed in our society. That's what we're constantly being told. Like I say, if you are looking at any advertising, you'll see fathers looking like fools, men basically just being demeaned on a constant basis. So then on top of all that, you have financial worries. So basically your use is now almost at an end. So basically our society is very, very toxic towards boys and men. And that's part of the submission we made into the NSOP, because it's to do with society itself. It's not just the actual end result, it's getting to that point where a man feels so unwanted by society and so unneeded, and the pressure's gone built up too much, he just wants out. The
idea of media representation is something that's been completely ignored, both intellectually and in academia and politically and socially as well, which is an important point. We have many studies, and there's third-level university programs dedicated to female representation in the media, and as we should. I mean, we should be aware of ourselves, at least as a society. But what we have is this continuous rhetoric, both from the more academic, intellectual end of society, and from our kind of popular culture part of it, that men will be sexual predators and are somehow inherently violent, and on the flip side of it, they would be either incredibly incompetent and have jobs only simply because of an old boys network or something like that. And the qualities of perseverance and work and endeavour and intelligence are completely left to the wayside, which presents a problem for young males particularly, because a major issue in terms of having their being psychologically
confidence.
Healthy. Confidence, exactly, and a good identity, have a good self-identity, male identity. So if you're presented with these two things, you can, on the one hand, you're presented with a negative identity, which is a very bad thing because it leads to self-loathing. And on the other hand, if you reject that, you're left with nothing else. There is no identity, which leads to social withdrawal because you don't feel like you can engage because you don't have an identity to present to the world.
Well, would you also
psychologically?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much stopped watching television about 5 years ago, thankfully. And my family don't really watch too much television, very, very rarely. But I have 3 sons and a daughter. And I've, every now and again, I'll turn on the television and have a little look-see to see, well, what way is it at the moment? How is it, operating? And what I'm seeing are these kind of... I don't know what it is, sitcom, soap type of deals. They seem to be getting younger and younger. And, it's always a multicultural family with a very weak male role model generally. And the only adverts, when I see adverts in between these, I'm noticing that the adverts that are geared towards boys are, come join the army. I don't know if you've noticed that.
It's probably the only ad which is geared towards men. Because advertising companies, but their clients know that most of consumer spending is done by females within society. This is just accepted. It's well up into the 3/4 or up to 80% or more of all consumer spending is female spending. So obviously they're going to spend money on advertising for that. And men aren't particularly... aren't particularly responsive to advertising. They've been trying to sell us male skincare products for at least 40 years, and we're just not having it.
No,
no, they cannot do it.
It's usually it's regarding skincare products. It's actually normally women and wives who buy it for their husbands.
And it stays on the shelf for 3 or 4 Christmases later. It's still sitting there.
Exactly, yeah.
No, I can concur there because, again, my sons have all been bought this material from lady friends, etc. And you're right, it just stacks on the shelves. They don't use it.
Yeah, so we are quite difficult to sell to. But I don't know what the reason is. So what you're left with is as you say, on TV.
Thank God.
I haven't seen TV for a while, but there is that where it does seem to be pretty much all females in advertising, which has negative benefits, negative impact as well on
which, to be honest, I mean,
self-esteem too.
And I'll come in there on that because I often, again, find myself kind of looking at the feminist perspective and saying, why aren't you going at the advertising agencies who are generally being operated now by women to sell to women, and they don't seem to be going at them for the way they're selling to women, which I think is horrific.
Yeah, well, it's yeah.
You'll find that feminists are actually going at the advertising agencies and stuff about the way they're selling the women because they claim that, get this, the advertising is gender based and it's positive male and anti-female. Now, I don't know if I'm not sure what, I'm up in Northern Ireland, I'm not sure if you get the same advertisements as I get.
I would imagine, most of them we would,
We've got lots of advertisements where we've got one where Jimmy Redknapp is away on a spa holiday and has to dig his way out to go for a beer. You know,
yeah.
And, you've got Captain Morgan's where they're making these ludicrous excuses out, dummies and stuff where they're sneaking out to have a beer, and I'm wondering, are they watching the same TV as me? Because the advertising definitely makes me out to be buffoons.
Well, I've noticed that, for example, even the DIY videos used to be, going back a few years, it was the man could come to MFI or B&Q, buy something, assemble it, and it would be perfect. Now they seem to be, you're right, that the man tries to put it together, makes an arse of it, and the woman has to come in and do it for him. I mean, I've seen the adverts, Sorry, Anne, I think you wanted to comment on something there, did you?
No, that just wouldn't work in my house. My husband doesn't do DIY.
Okay. See, they do exist,
Yeah.
I think one of the other things, going back to domestic abuse, I'd like to talk about the recent EU survey of violence against women.
Okay.
What they did there, basically, they interviewed 42,000 women across the EU in all the various different countries, but they did not ask any men their experiences of abuse. According to the survey, it was 1 in 3 women across Europe have suffered violence either in the home or outside the home, whereas in Ireland it's 1 in 4 women have. In Ireland it's 1 in 4 women have suffered violence. In the home, I believe it was. But the EU survey, I mean, according to that, it was like they said it was 62 million. According to the EU survey, they would have worked out 62 million women across the EU would have suffered violence. Now, I know every single man I know has suffered violence at some stage. So if you were to do the same kind of survey of 42,000 men, you would find that every single man suffered violence at some stage in his life. It's something that annoys the hell out of me. From that survey, they went into the Istanbul Convention, which they're trying to bring at the moment, which is something that we are very opposed to because we are quite frankly sick of it. It's a disgusting piece of legislation which is deeply anti-male.
Well, if you just look at the image I just posted there from the Istanbul Convention, the actual image they have is a man with the line cut off through his head, stop is written on his chest, and then we have 4 images of women that look like they're being either intimidated by and the assumption is by the man.
Yeah, it's in the text of the Istanbul Convention. It's explicitly violence against women, and it's gender feminist ideology. Men are the only perpetrators. women are only victims. It's totally divorced from reality. And I hope that the Irish government will not sign this and will not ratify this.
We have spoken to the Minister for Equality, and she says they are going to be signing it. They need to change our legislation to suit it.
Yeah, well, we need to continue as Anna Regan has succeeded in Wales. I'm sure we can succeed in Ireland.
Yeah, the problem is that the phrase gender-based violence is what that essentially means. What most people assume that is against women. All they basically did was they changed the actual name from violence against women to gender-based violence. Every time anybody ever says the name gender-based violence, it means it's somebody beating somebody else because of their gender.
Yes.
Now, most domestic abuse, at least over 50% of it is mutual. It's not a case where it's the guy walks into the house, "Where's my dinner?" and gives her a thump and starts beating the J's out of her.
No, that hasn't happened. If that ever happened, it hasn't happened in 50 years.
For the most part, it's usually a case where it's two people beating each other up or screaming and shouting at each other, and the kids are in front of them. That's what most of domestic violence is.
There's been Irish studies that confirm that too.
But you should remember as well. Sorry, I just wanted to remind ourselves as well, because these figures are terribly scary and frightening, that domestic violence is very small. I mean, it's not the vast majority of cohabiting couples live together quite happily.
Yeah.
And are very loving and considerate towards each other. We're talking about 2 and 3% of cohabiting couples where this would occur. So all percentages that we're referring to, that you would refer to, are relating to that sort of scale within the community. I mean, tragic as it is, I mean, I'm not saying that this should be ignored. It's not insignificant. It's a large number. But you're absolutely right. There is a kind of a circle of violence back and forth, which needs to be addressed, but it can't be solved if you're only looking at half of the problem. And reports which are produced, like you're mentioning the recent reports, which is now poster campaigns everywhere, it's all over the radio, that European national report, which provided these very scary statistics. But the actual report itself has things like the question on physical violence, for example, says where since you were 15 years old until now, in the past 12 months, how often has someone? And then there's a list of things. And it includes pushed or shoved you, which isn't really what anyone would understand as domestic violence in the real sense of the word.
It's just not. Can I ask you this, though, and again, open to the group? I'm just looking at some of this here, just some of the phraseology. Are you fearful that, for example, if this John says it's definitely coming in, but if it does, that it's going to be used in the courts again to effectively, and I'm going to have to say it because it's going to be one-sided against men?
Yes, absolutely.
Very.
I think it is. If you read the language in the convention, it's extraordinarily aggressive, and it's couched in a way which is against men. It puts the blame on men for violence. Quoting from the preamble, it says recognizing that the structural nature of violence against women is gender-based violence, and that violence against women is one of the crucial social mechanisms by which women are kept subordinate. This is an extraordinarily aggressive statement, which, if it is passed into law, will render men into second-class citizens in this state. Articles some of the articles in the convention also would result in severe disadvantage for men. For instance, one of them is the case where where a man can be driven out of his house simply on the say-so of a woman.
Well, this is what I was getting at. So, in other words, do you feel that this will be used to falsify and inflate figures of domestic violence that, as you say, a shove, while unpleasant, most people, I don't think, who suffer from what we term genuine domestic violence would really consider that domestic violence as such, but it's going to label an awful lot more people as domestically violent.
Yes, I believe it is. I believe it is because the language is so one-sided. It's so black and white that it leaves the courts with no room any kind of fair-minded judgment. And in this regard, I would like to ask Anne about her experience of this in Wales. I would ask in particular, has the question been asked, is this convention, has it been attacked on the grounds that it's unequal, it's totally unequal? Has this question been raised of that it in a totally unequal way?
Oh, she's on the phone. She's
just as, Pat, can you say a ring back? Sorry, there was a phone call then. Right, in Wales, they actually changed the bill at the 11th hour, which it was ending violence against women. It's now gender-based violence and domestic abuse and sexual violence. I'm really, really pleased about this. It's a small victory. We've campaigned. Please don't give up hope. Please lobby all the time. At the 11th hour they changed it, and I really think you will be able to do this. I mean, I saw my assembly member, I saw my MP, anyone where I could get my voice heard, because it was discriminated against men everywhere, on every part of it, and it will be used. It will be used in family courts. One thing we've seen changed in Wales is legal aid. So now to claim legal aid, there has to be allegations of domestic abuse. So that is shot through the roof. Allegations of domestic abuse. So these people can now claim legal aid if they make those allegations. So you've really got to watch it. Make sure that you campaign on every corner there, because it's going to discriminate against men unbelievably.
Well, you see, again, I mean, I really appreciate the fact that you're in here, and I mean, I'd encourage as many women as possible to get involved in this conversation, because I think the point, this is an issue for men and women who are all fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters. We all have... Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Anne.
There is, I mean, we all know someone. I mean, because I volunteer now for Families Need Fathers, Both Parents Matter. We support grandparents. We all know someone that's going through this terrible, terrible time. Family courts discriminate against the non-resident parent. And if they brought in this legislation that was ending violence against women, it would have been 10 times worse. I mean, you've got to stop it. What I found, the women's movement of this way of working together far better than the men's movement. The men's movements are fragmented. They've all got different issues. They campaign on, genital mutilation. They campaign on suicide, domestic abuse. They've all got their own issues and agendas. The women's movement campaign on being victims, and they keep together. We are the victims. I mean, there's got to be a joint campaign by the men's movement to pull everything together so that you get your voice heard everywhere. I mean, I was so frustrated in the conference that I attended, because the conference was absolutely brilliant. Everyone had valid points and issues that needed addressing. But we were about to leave that conference without emotion, without an idea that we would all link on. And, so we did manage to get an issue that we would link on. But I mean, that I just feel that the men's movement needs to link together on suicide. I mean, absolutely, it should be the one pulled together, stop being so fragmented. You will win big fights.
Well, the difficulty, I agree with you fully. The idea of presenting an entire movement using the victim status is attractive, because a lot of women can identify with that, and excuses you for not achieving what you wanted to achieve. And also many men would get behind it as well. It provides popular support because nobody wants anyone to be victimized or hurt in any way, particularly if they're a female. But it's the response to that as an overwhelming, as a kind of an umbrella idea is extraordinarily difficult to achieve, because basically what you would be saying is, as a group, and is beginning to happen now with the younger men involved in this, there's the Going Galt, which happened back in the 90s into the early 2000s, and then MGTOW and the Grass Eaters in Southeast Asia. There's a response now to that coming from the States, which is very aggressive. And there's a young generation of men, like 17, 18, 19 years of age, who are forming a group with the intent of, we don't care anymore. This seems to be the response, because after so long of trying to talk and discuss things with a single, not even a dialogue, it's just you try to have a conversation and someone is just screaming victim in your face, that they're just saying, we don't care. They don't, and that seems to be something which is forming itself into a generalized opinion.
So
which
there's
is
a dismissive attitude.
It's what?
A dismissive attitude.
It's they're just simply saying that we've heard all this before. They've heard it since they were children. They've heard their parents, their fathers at it, and they just don't care. Like it's beginning to develop into a kind of a. The concern that you would have for others isn't there. Like the care for the community and so forth. The community doesn't care about me. Why should I care about it? No matter what you do, women are going to complain anyway. So hell mend them. The response to "I'm a victim" would be a big resounding "we don't care," is not something that a lot of men are comfortable with. So it is extraordinarily difficult. I should say, that there's something to link them all together is very hard. Nobody wants to identify as a victim. It's more to do with a solution-based thing, and the solutions are never clean and easy. They're kind of messy and tricky, and it's there's no slogan, like 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, that you can get behind, because it's I don't know. It is, as you say, it's extraordinarily difficult. But in terms of like continuity, much earlier on, I don't know why it came to mind. The Titanic was mentioned about men being left behind. To compare that to 100 years later with the Concordia in Italy, where the entire ship was abandoned by the crew entirely, including the captain, and who were, I think, subsequently imprisoned because of it, because it's illegal to do that. Yeah. But when the announcement was made, abandoned ship, literally everyone for themselves. The men manned the lifeboats and got in and just left, leaving anyone who wasn't really getting onto the boats behind, and women had to look after themselves. And there was a huge outcry because of this, that this was a disgraceful behaviour. How dare they? And why, you kind of wonder, this is 100 years later, and this is exactly what has been expected of them. And they did the correct thing. They were told to abandon the ship. They went out and they just simply began manning the lifeboats, literally manning the lifeboats with men, and went about getting off the boat. And the women were standing around expecting to be picked up or something. I don't know what it was exactly. But those men were hugely criticised for doing that their duty was to stay on board the ship until all women had left. And this is 2014. It's not like it's 1908 or 1910, So that cultural thing is still very much there.
I have to be honest. I wonder even about the Titanic. I wonder, was that a bit of a myth that's kind of been reinforced that women and children first. I have to be honest. I'm highly skeptical.
Yeah, there was no recording equipment there.
Yeah, well, exactly.
I think there would have been quite a few men who said, "Actually, frankly, I'm not into this." Yeah. Until the captain produced a pistol and began shooting people or something. Yeah. These certain things were recorded, so we know that that did happen. Men were shot for attempting to get onto the lifeboats. So at least it indicates that some men were just not into it. Particularly if you were third class, I think you didn't know anything to your classes.
I think in the case of the Titanic, basically, it was mostly mostly men who died on the Titanic. And of 15 of the survivors of the Titanic, they ended up killing themselves after they were shamed into. They were shamed.
Guilt. Survivor guilt, I think it's called.
Yeah, they had the suffragettes going after them and deliberately shaming them into committing suicide.
Well, the strange thing was, if you're on board the Titanic, it's going back 100 years now, but statistically speaking, your chances of survival were better if you were female, regardless of anywhere. If you were a female in third class, you had a better chance of survival than a first class member, a male member, up on the top deck, because you would have to stand by.
50% of third-class female passengers survived, whereas was 35% of first-class male passengers survived. And the story that we've been sold that the first class got on first, got the lifeboats, that just doesn't bear out with the figures. It's crazy. There was a definite women and children first on that boat, without a shadow of a doubt. There's a plaque outside Belfast City Hall with the names of all the victims and the word Mr. in front of 98% of them, or I think it's 92% of them, shows that there was a definite women and children first approach.
Yeah, well, the men have been honoured and glorified in history and in probably more recently as well, because with the disaster having the 100-year centenary and all that type of thing, that you're rewarded for that in death. You're given these honours, this kind of glory idea and heroism. That's what you're supposed to do. So that's still here. It's not as if it's been left behind, and it's being reinforced by various policies such as the Istanbul Convention, where men have to offer up all of their hard-won sort of rights and protections under law in order to protect females, because nobody in their right mind would say it's okay to hit anybody. I mean, that's not something you could possibly argue against. You'd have to be insane to say that. But at the same time, you have a right to defend yourself, whether that's in a physical sense or whether it's in a legal sense. But the difficulty here is trying to defend that legally without appearing to look as if, for some reason, you think it's okay to start hitting people around the head once you're at home.
Can I just come back a little bit to the Istanbul Convention, if you don't mind? I've been just trying to find out what it is they mean when they use the term gender. Do they mean what exactly?
All men are abusers, all women are victims. Simple as that.
No, but I mean, are they offering an actual definition anywhere for that and in their interpretation?
In the article itself, if you look at Article 3, it says there what a victim is. It says a victim is female. That's...
Woman means both woman and girl in the meaning. The meaning of the word woman in the Istanbul Convention is woman and girl.
Okay. Sorry, David. Come on ahead.
In the Istanbul Convention, I think in Article 3C, it says, gender shall mean the socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women. This has been a favorite issue for the women's group, for women's studies for many, many years. This notion of gender construction and that it's a socially constructed idea. But we have to argue against that because we don't believe that it's that violence is socially constructed in the sense that is meant here. It says, further, gender-based violence against women shall mean violence that is directed against a woman because she is a woman or that affects women disproportionately. Again, the women's groups have successfully marketed the idea that women are victims in our society. They have successfully transmitted that idea, and the media cooperated with it. The women are victims. This is taken for granted. It's socially adopted, recognized, and it's an issue that has to be challenged, I believe. We simply have to challenge this idea. On something that was said earlier, I think it was by Anne, that men need to get their act together. Men's groups need to campaign together. I have to point out that there are no state-funded men's groups.
Well, that was where I was going to go next, David, because does anybody have figures available, for example, as to how much funding women's groups are getting?
The likes of a man gets about 40,000 a year. A man is the domestic abuse help for men. I mean, if I've been quoted figures before that the Irish feminist movement get 22 million per year. I cannot find any definite figures for that other than what I've heard. I'm sure others here will be able to find them. for you. I'd like to go back to something else about, I have there in the low bar base, there's a YouTube video which is made from in Spain, where they have a very, very similar legislation put in place, which is very similar to the Domestic Abuse Against Women Act, which they're trying to bring into Ireland. And essentially what it is, they reckon it's like out of every 100 complaints, 90-something% of them are false. So what happens is every single man who is accused of it gets taken out of his house within 48 hours. There's judges complaining about this, there's lawyers complaining about this, there's grandparents never seeing their grandchildren again, all because a woman decides, well, she can get better out of this by making a false complaint. She doesn't need to actually prove it or validate it. All she has to do is make that complaint. And that was brought into Spain by feminist ideology. I don't want that here. I don't want that whole notion where all someone has to do is pick up the phone and that's it. You're going to be pulled out.
In theory, under the Constitution.
One other thing, if you actually read the actual the convention itself, it says your neighbour can do it as well.
Right.
It's not just your wife. Your neighbour can actually go in and make complaint on your behalf, even if you don't need to. Even if you don't need any help.
Right, you see, but in theory, under the Constitution, Article 40.5 and 41.11, that shouldn't be possible here.
Yeah, well, they'll try.
Well, I mean, look, I know. I've heard of incredible things happen that supposedly the Constitution will not allow. I've seen them with my own two eyes. But
yes, that's a very good question. I mean, it raises the whole question about equality. What does equality mean? Article 40.1, I think it is, guarantees equality of treatment before the law to all citizens. But it seems to me that the Istanbul Convention it directly contravenes that article. And I would like to something we need to find out is what a good constitutional lawyer would think of the convention. There is another article in the convention which is quite extraordinary. It's Article 5.1, and it's brief enough that I can read it for you.
Please do.
It says, parties shall refrain from engaging in any act of violence against women and ensure that state authorities, officials, agents and institutions act in conformity with this obligation. Now that to me is an extraordinary provision because it essentially says that the state's police force and the state's agents shall refrain from engaging in any act of violence against women.
It's okay to exclude men.
Sorry?
Yeah, I mean, why does that sentence not finish with just any act of violence?
Absolutely. It's excluding men completely, isn't it?
It is, yes. It's quite an extraordinary provision. And do you have, did you come across this in the law that you were fighting against in Wales?
Yeah, I mean, I engaged with the Equality and Human Rights Commission early on when I realised what the proposed legislation was. They were very helpful. They kept telling me they were going to keep a very close eye on the proceedings. But I mean, I really don't know to this day why it was changed at the 11th hour. As I said, I'm very pleased it was. But I mean, it was completely discriminating against men, you know. And I mean, I just can't understand how mothers of sons are not up in arms.
Well, again, I mean, I'm going to say it again. If it actually said it the other way around,
yeah,
the streets would be getting ripped apart as we speak.
I mean, I'm just so concerned that mothers of boys or grandmothers of grandsons are not, you know,
screaming and like I was, you know. I mean, I was a lone voice in a public consultation of 150 odd people, but I didn't care. People came on to me afterwards and supported me, but not during the conference or the public consultation.
Well, overall, I mean, I'm sure most of you will agree that there seems to have been this continuous erosion of the family unit, or even any version perceived, if you will, even of the family unit. Now, some people will say, I suppose, that even these new family structures they're claiming exist, even though we all know they've always existed, but they're trying to legislate for these new or these other structures that, let's say the nuclear family. Let's say that's 75 or 65% of the population, what's considered a nuclear family, husband, wife and children. And all these other types of families that they claim they are trying to legislate into existence. We've known about them, of course, for a long, long time. But they're finding now as they try to legislate for these situations, they seem to be doing so with an eye to weaken what the nuclear family, if you will.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's why on earth aren't we seeing and supporting the family unit as exists? I support gay rights. I'm very equality minded. But it seems that men's equality doesn't exist.
I'll just put this to the Irish chaps, because again, the Irish Constitution, it's geared to protect the family, they say. And here's the interesting thing. There was a recent case, I don't know if you're aware of this case, of the woman who, she was separated from the father of the child, but the child was living with her. And it was a reversal in the sense that the father was insisting the child be vaccinated against the mother's wishes. And they weren't actually a married couple. And when it came to the court, I think it got to the Supreme Court, and the judgment was, when she made the argument that the family should be protected, she was told, well, according to the Constitution, that family is a married couple. You're not married, so therefore you're not afforded that protection. And I wonder, do the other so-called, I'm going to use the term, mixed genders or different types of family structures realise, therefore, that they're not protected under the Constitution unless they're married? And I don't mean civil partnership. Civil partnership does not mean married, as far as the Constitution is concerned. Were any of you aware of that kind of subtle little thing, even though it's quite big?
I remember the amount of arguments that we've seen regarding same-sex marriage and moving on from the civil unions and things like that.
Right, but you see, it's not a marriage. This is the point I'm making. It's a civil union. It's not a marriage.
It is. It's different.
Yeah, it is.
But as you say, the important part there is the word marriage. It kind of has a trigger mechanism which allows...
Well, it has a constitutional trigger mechanism. This is the point I'm making. So, effectively, what people really need to understand, if you think you have some rights in your relationship because you're in a civil union or otherwise, if you're not actually married, according to the High Court here, the Supreme Court, I'm not sure which it was, you are not afforded that protection under the Constitution. And I think that's a biggie.
It is. It's pretty massive.
They also, believe it or not, will not define what a family is. They have no definition for the word family.
I see what you mean. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just assumed to mean...
No, they say, well, it has written in the Constitution, marriage is the family is based on marriage. But they won't define what family is. I mean, I know guys who'll tell me that their dogs are family,
Yeah.
So, and I know women who'll tell you that their cats and budgies are family. But what I'm saying is they won't define it, but what they are saying is, well, maybe we don't have to define it because you're telling us you're not married, so you're not afforded any protection under that, regardless.
And what protection was being sought in that particular case in the Supreme Court decision?
Well, she was looking to have under 41.11, which is that I'll read it for you here. I actually have. I meant to give it to you. I think I did give it to you earlier. There's the direct literal translation of the 1937 Bunreacht na hÉireann. Now, what I did was, there's a big book you can buy. It's like 900 pages, and I took all the direct literal translation in English out, and I put it beside the actual English that's used in the little blue book. So, for example, if you read Article 41.11, if you scroll, it should just download down there for you. It's only small; it'll only take a second. And if you scroll down to Article 41.11, which is on, I'll tell you now exactly what page it's on. I should have had that memorized, and there we go. It's on page...
Oh, I can't open it.
Oh, it's a PDF. Oh, it's a Word document. Sorry, it's a Word. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to copy the text and I'm going to put it into the chat box for you. You'll see it in...
Pass it away.
You'll see it in the Skype chat box there now. There you go. So if you see there, it says, what's in the little blue book that you buy is the English text, which is the state recognises the family as the natural, primary and fundamental unit group of society and as a moral institution possessing inalienable and imprescriptible rights, antecedent and superior to all positive law. Now, most people don't know what that means, but when you read the literal English translation, the state acknowledges that the family is the basic primary group unit for society according to nature, and that it is a moral institution which has inalienable, invincible rights which are more ancient and higher than any human statute. Now, that is an incredible difference. You see, when the Constitution has positive law, it means statute law, and when it has just law, if you will, that's direct harm, loss, injury, etc., what we'd call like common law, Brehon law, that type of thing. So, and there are other examples of that. So, for example, the home is inviolable save as according to law. So, for example, if you have parking tickets, the Gardaí can't kick your door in. But if you have committed a violent act, then they can. So, under positive law, which is really a civil statute as such, they cannot breach the door to your home, the dwelling. But under law, as it were, as in if you've killed somebody and you've run into somebody's house and locked the door behind you, then they can kick in the door because it's an actual crime, if you will.
Hot pursuit?
Well, yes, but even if they're in hot pursuit over parking tickets, they still can't break in the door if you run into someone's house and shut the door behind you.
Yeah.
So how does parental responsibility come into this? And, here, if
this is why they won't define
if you're
the family
named on the birth certificate, then you have parental responsibility. So going back to the lady that didn't want to vaccinate and...
Well, not quite, and I'll tell you why. There's no mention of birth certificates in the Constitution. They're not covered by the Constitution. Yeah, no, believe me, I've been reading this material for about 20 years. I'm very well versed in all aspects of the Constitution. So, there's nothing about birth certificates in there, and that's not what affords you that protection.
Right. So even if you are the dad and you're named on the birth certificate, it's still not. Yeah.
No, it would actually. You see, this is why they won't define family.
Yeah.
They can't effectively.
But at the end of the day, did the vaccination occur or not? What was the result? I'm
not 100% sure. The judge did order it, but whether it happened or not, we're not sure, because at one stage the woman did go into hiding for 6 months with her son.
It's like
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So. I said it's like a contact order, isn't it? It's not worth the paper it's written on, because it's never enforced. Well, there is no policing of contact orders in family courts.
Well, again, it also brought to light that one partner of a failed relationship can effectively, which is what this woman felt, can effectively use the machinery of the state to inflict harm on the ex, as it were. Now,
and the child.
And the child. Well, I mean, he, for all we know, he felt it was vital that his child was vaccinated, but that's another whole issue. But she felt the opposite, and again, it there was no harm apparent in the child. The child wasn't sick or anything, No. So these were just the run-of-the-mill vaccinations, if you will. It wasn't to treat an ongoing infection or condition or whatever, But it and again, that case got very little attention compared to what I believe it should. That to me should have been as significant almost as the X case, because I think she had to leave the jurisdiction at one stage.
Well, I'd be interested to know what was the end result, whether the vaccination did occur or how that decision would be arrived at. Because it would be in the best interest of the child to be vaccinated.
Well, again, you see, this was the idea that the judge was basically saying that. Now, she was saying, well, who are you to determine that over and above the family? And she said, I am his family. And he said, you're not afforded that protection because you're not married.
Okay.
In other words, he was telling her, if you were married, you would be correct. And the judgment would have to go for you. But because you're not married, I can go against you. And he did.
So even if they were married, the wife would have that last word. Is that the correct way to understand it?
Basically, I think either parent would, if they were married, and either parent objected to a child having I mean, this doesn't just come into vaccination. This comes into genital mutilation. You can put all sorts of issues in here, which is the point I'm making.
Yeah.
Be it genital mutilation, vaccination, blood, because based on religious views of one partner as opposed to another, some people have certain beliefs that, blood transfusions can't happen, etc. And it could literally affect all of these issues. Even that, what was the Indian woman's name? Halapanavar, was it? It could have had a serious effect on that as well. And even this case that's, I sent a link to John earlier from Irish Central. Suicidal woman is refused abortion under Ireland's new laws. I'll just put that link in there as well. I don't know if you've seen that one. You'd looked at that one, John, had you?
Yeah.
So you see, all of these issues, this is the version of the Constitution that almost nobody knows exists, because...
But I'm still not sure how, if there is a marriage in place, then there is the constitutional protection. Is the constitutional protection afforded to the marriage or to the individuals within the marriage?
Seemingly it's to the marriage.
Well, who represents the marriage then?
Well, either party, you see, because technically, under the Constitution, man and woman, once they are married, are one.
Yeah, for the purposes of, for that purpose.
So you see, if either side...
There's a difference.
Well, the idea would be that either side of the marriage has to say no, and it's the same as if both of them have said no.
Okay, so there must be agreement before anything can be done.
Yes.
Presumably. So if one wanted within the marriage, if the vaccination was to occur and the wife said no and the husband said, well, I think it's really important, then nothing would happen. Effectively,
yes,
there would be no vaccination.
That's my understanding from from what that judge said in that. There is an article somewhere in the paper. If somebody in the chat box would be good enough to try and find that article for me, I'd really appreciate it, because it's well worth looking at.
Right. Well, similarly, if the wife did want to have the vaccination and the husband didn't, then it wouldn't happen either within the marriage.
Well, again, you see, I mean, if you take, let's move the fact that it was about vaccination. If we just move that to one side and imagine,
it's irrelevant,
a circumcision,
something to focus on, that's all.
Right, but if it was about a circumcision, you see, again, you'll hear all the arguments for and against, like vaccination. People say, well, if everybody around the child is vaccinated, why should it be a problem?
That's not an argument. That doesn't even make any sense.
Well, again, they call it herd immunity, for example, But this is what I'm saying. These are.
Can I change the subject a bit there,
Pardon me?
I'll change the subject there for a moment.
Sure.
Dave was talking to me before about, we were discussing before what things we wanted to talk about. One of the things was the new prostitution legislation, which is
yes,
they're trying to bring out. That is again, will do the same, pretty much the same thing as what the Istanbul Convention will do, which is demonize men. In that legislation is things, for example, like again about the unequal power structure and how men are abused and women are victims and all that. I've spoken to some sex workers in recent months, and most of them have become sex workers by their own choice. So Dave knows a bit more about this than I do. He, if he wants to go on, cut in there.
It's again, it's very similar. The prostitution legislation being proposed for this country under the Swedish model. It's very similar in tone to the violence, the violence against women. The idea is the same. I mean, the underlying ideology is the same. That again, women are victims. The phrase used is something like that. Prostitution is seen as male violence against women, as a particularly serious form of male violence against women and domination, and it sees males as the predator invariably, and it sees the woman as the victim, almost always as the victim. And the Swedish model proposes that the person who purchases sexual services be criminalized, whereas the seller is not. And again, it parallels what we'll be talking about on the domestic violence, the violence situation. Again, the male is held responsible. The woman can do no wrong. And this is where it's going. It was the campaign was waged in this country by the Turn Off the Red Light campaign. It consisted of 3 core groups: the National Women's Council, the Ruhama, and the Immigrant Council of Ireland. And they succeeded in gaining enormous amount of support for it, including the support of 6 trade unions and many other organizations, they, for instance, the Irish Medical Organization and the INMO, the Irish Nurses and Midwives Organization. So they had a huge amount of success in that regard. Again, men were on the back foot. They were unorganized. Again, it was a case that there were no men's organizations which were available to stand up and fight for men's rights. And just the same as in the domestic violence cases and the violence against women case, there are no men's organizations which are standing there, which are state funded and which are ready to take up these issues and put the case for men. There were no organizations apart from the Sex Workers Alliance which fought this campaign. The result has been that the Joint Oireachtas Committee, which considered the matter and held hearings on it, they produced an enormously slanted report which totally favoured the Swedish model and put forward very, very severe legislation which, again, as I say, would criminalise men.
And has this helped the women themselves? I mean, presumably the legislation was brought in on the understanding that if some heinous crime, or violent crime occurred during a prostitutional exchange, that the woman would be able to go to the police without fear of being arrested as a prostitute. I mean, is there any reports to show that this approach, the Swedish model, has actually reduced that type of crime? I mean, it's there to protect women initially in the first instance. Or anything contradictory? I mean, is there anything?
No, I mean, there is legislation already in existence which allows a woman who is a sex worker, who is being abused, or who is being attacked by a man, under the ordinary legislation, she is entitled to call the police and take an action against the aggressor. So that doesn't call for particular legislation. The Swedish model, in regard to its actual success, there is no good evidence to show that it has been successful. In fact, the evidence points the other way. For instance, Norway implemented the Swedish model back in 2009, but at the moment, 3 of the, I think it's 6 parties, or 5 parties in government are opposing it. They want it struck down because it doesn't help sex workers, and sex workers are actually that they have been victimized under the legislation. It's actually paradoxical. The effect of the legislation is that sex workers feel that they're more discriminated against than before.
One of the problems it drives the actual sex industry underground because that's basically one of the biggest problems where they cannot be protected. Now, where they are now, they can be protected because the police know who they are. But once the buyers become criminalized, then what happens is the police will be looking for them. So in order for the workers to do trade, they have to go somewhere that the actual buyers cannot be found. Then the workers are actually in danger.
That's right. That's right. Whereas in the past, if a purchaser of sex had a suspicion that a woman was trafficked, for instance, or was being exploited, that person could go to the police and tell them this. But under the Swedish legislation, any person, let's say a man who had such suspicions, would not do so because he feels he would immediately be arrested under the law and charged. That is one of the effects that it has had, and that's one of the reasons why it's driven the whole thing underground. And women are now, the sex workers themselves, are now forced to make arrangements with a customer or a client in hurried situation, whereas in the past they might be able to negotiate in more freedom or with greater amount of time in order to assess whether or not this person was actually safe to deal with or not.
There's one other thing. The other thing is that, I mean, what people talk about it when they say prostitutes, they keep on saying female, but there are male.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, John. Yeah, the male prostitutes, as far as I'm aware, in Ireland, it's pretty much 60-40 now, I think, isn't it?
I don't know. I mean, basically, this new legislation keeps on saying female. So that's something else. That's something else to bear in mind here. Basically.
Yeah, the legislation tries to make out that it is gender neutral, but in actual fact, if you read between the lines, you will see very quickly that it is all part of so-called violence against women. The description that I mentioned at the outset, that prostitution is seen as a particularly serious form of male violence against women, that gives the game away straight away.
Well, there is another very interesting thing about the Constitution. Again, you're aware of, maybe you aren't. Anytime the Constitution mentions a particular gender, it also infers and implies the opposite gender.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't realise that. So, for example, I know somebody at the moment they're basically looking for what they would have if they were a single mother at home looking after children. It's a man on his own, and his wife has actually passed. He got into a relationship with someone else, and it affected how things were. She left, and she actually left him with one of her children too. And effectively, he's looking for the children's allowance, etc.
Yeah.
And this is how he's going after it. He's saying where it implies female, it implies male.
Exactly, yes.
But he's not entitled to the allowance, is that at the moment?
Well, there's a bit more to it, but effectively, yes, that's the way it's worked out, yes. There's other allowances, but he's saying, no, I don't want another allowance, I want this allowance.
Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't realise that was the case. But on the prostitution thing there, at the moment, it's prostitution is legal, but the soliciting is illegal. Is that right?
Something like that. Yes.
It's not a crime for two adults, consensual arrangement where sex is exchanged for money. That is perfectly legal. What is criminalised is such thing as soliciting, brothel keeping, pimping,
running a brothel, which is essentially means more than two girls working in one place. That's considered a brothel.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. What happens in other countries? What they do is they protect each other.
Exactly, John. Then this is one of the innovations that was introduced under the New Zealand law. The New Zealand struck out a new path in regard to prostitution legislation back in 2003, I think it was. They introduced legislation. Prostitution is legal. In fact, it's actually legal to run a brothel. But you have to be certified by the state. You have to apply for certification. But under the legislation, it allows up to 4 women, let's say, to get together in an apartment and act as sex workers. They don't need to apply for certification. They can act together, and that way they can protect each other. They can look out for each other. They don't need a pimp, and it seems to be working out better. In regard to the way the Swedish model has been working, it's actually worth pointing out that Scotland, the Scottish Parliament considered the Swedish model actually 3 times. The first time was back in 2010, and they turned it down. It came up again in 2011, and again it was turned down. And it came up a third time in 2013, and yet again it was turned down. So it shows the persistence with which the radical feminists have been pushing this issue there, that they have persisted that many times over a period of 3 years. And another situation that is worth looking at is Denmark. Denmark looked at the prostitution legislation, the Swedish model. They considered it carefully for their own legislation, and in a very, very detailed report, they turned it down because they said that it basically doesn't work, and they said that it's too difficult to monitor. It would require too much police surveillance, because that is essentially what would be required. Police surveillance would take place on all suspected acts of sexual liaisons where money might be exchanged, and this would be hugely consuming of police time. And the final reason they turned it down was because they felt that it was actually harmful to the sex workers themselves.
Wow.
If it doesn't protect women, it shouldn't be enacted. Basically, that's the bottom line.
Absolutely.
It's nothing to do with protecting women.
It's not.
No, it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be the typical. A committee sits down to design a racehorse, and we end up with a limp camel that's blind in one eye and deaf in an ear. 42 wants to make a quick point there.
Based on ideology, just like the violence against the whole domestic violence, it's based on ideology. It's radical feminist ideology, which claims that women are always victims and men are always predators. That's the.
And what do women think about this? I mean,
Can I just add?
Sorry, I've a couple of things. First of all,
say something?
Sure, go on.
No, I just want to say just to repeat what David said. The Turn Off the Red Light campaign originated with a Labour Party motion that was passed in 2003 on violence against women, and then basically that's the origins of it. It basically evolved into the Turn Off the Red Light campaign. In 2009, the Labour woman passed a motion declaring that all prostitution was violence against women, and that in turn led to the setting up of the Turn Off the Red Light campaign. The Labour Party was the first large political party in the Republic of Ireland to join the Turn Off the Red Light campaign. There are certain people who seem to think that it's religious in motivation, this anti-prostitution movement, but I think it's feminist. It's the feminists who are driving it, and we need to stop that.
Are you suggesting that they're simply using the religious aspect when it suits them?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, 42, you want to come in. Please go ahead.
Yes. There's a curiosity about this prostitution, the whole thing. A lot of the new Violence Against Women Acts and the Likes Istanbul Convention are based upon the supposed fact that women have always been men have always had an automatic right to sexual services from females, and I'm curious as to that does not fit with prostitution being the oldest profession, and they need to get rid of prostitution because it's proven that men don't actually have that automatic access to sexual services because they need to go and buy it.
Wow, that's a very okay. Can I don't really know how to respond to that one, to be honest. I'll have to think about that one. Can we get to the video, guys, if you don't mind, because we are running tight on time now. It's 20 to.
Right, no problem. There's two things. Basically, we had two essential days out. One was in Dunleary, where I got 100 flowers from a florist there who gave them to us for free. And the thing was, we were going to hand them out to women walking past, talk to them about male suicide rates, and explain that things are not quite as great for men as a lot of people have said they were. But the thing that it didn't totally surprise me, but every woman we spoke to, they all knew that men do not have it as easy as what people say that we do. I mean, they all knew at least 2, 3 or 4 men have killed themselves. So many of those women went along and they stood and they held a sign up saying they support men's rights in Ireland. So that was a very successful outing. We only took about 3 or 4 hours to do
on that, John. Devil's advocate for a moment.
And then what we did was we decided to have a day in Dublin City with David and with another guy. And what we did is we we approached women and we spoke to them about what it was we were doing and why we were doing it. Again, we mentioned the suicide rates, and again, that every woman, most young women know full well that men do not have it anywhere near as easy as what people say they do. But the hardest thing we find is getting women to stand up and start screaming. I mean, they all know.
There's a quiet understanding, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, knowing is one thing, but actually getting out there and saying, it's your son, it's your brother, it's your father, it's your lover, your husband, your boyfriend. It's not just some statistic somewhere. I mean, sooner or later, it's going to affect you. So, I mean, stand up, start counting.
I've heard the term, for example, that's been chucked around the internet last 6 months. I've noticed it more and more, and it's this idea or notion of check your privilege. Now, sometimes it's been used against people who are supposedly being racist, sexist, all sorts of things. This idea of check your privilege. And what I noticed in that video was, again, I want to play devil's advocate just for a second, the idea that is there a quiet understanding that a lot of women would have that, you know, even if they pick a bad one, that it's okay, somewhere in the back of their mind they know that the state will take care of them. Do you think, how prevalent is that in the back of, you know?
I think what it is, basically, if women and men got equal rights, women would be worse off.
Right.
That's it. I mean, every person I know is aware of that. If we all got equal rights, we'd all be worse off. That's it. I mean, that's the bottom line here. So, I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I mean, the thing I would suggest would be that all laws become gender neutral. I would suggest that charities along the lines of Women's Aid or the Rape Crisis Centre or any of those feminist-run organisations, even the ones that claim to be for equality, there's I can't damn name it, but there's one organisation that is supposed to be for equal rights for I think it's civil liberties, something like that, but it's run by feminists. Some of the
I think John's Skype is actually dropping off there again. He should come back in. I think 42, you want to come in?
No, I was just going to say about the whole privilege thing. It's offering women true equality that comes with consequences for actions is actually giving them a pay cut, because they're going to have. They're going to lose their actual privilege, and it's absolutely crazy. We have managed to create a society where women have very little consequences for their actions, and that needs to change.
Right. This is what I was getting towards with the whole check your privilege idea. That you know, sorry, I don't know if we've got John back yet. No, we still haven't. He's having Skype troubles, and I'm sure he's infuriated because he really wants to come in for this last bit. And maybe, do you want to?
Yeah. I was just, because John was just sort of saying about, you know, there's a lot of awareness there from women that men are not as privileged as what people were perceiving. But I just wonder, is it fear? Is it fear that women are not speaking out? Because of, if you read anything from Erin Peasy and I've spoken to her, and you know, she's my heroine. I absolutely admire her so much. She had a terrible, terrible time from the Feminist Association, you know, because she was speaking out on equality issues. And I just wonder,
do women feel oppressed by feminists, Anne? Do you think?
Yes, absolutely. She was, he was threatened a lot by feminists because she was talking about, which she actually sort of said that the most violent people she met in her refuge in Chiswick in the 70s were women. And, you know, she was very, very outspoken. She thought that the family unit should be treated holistically and not separated. She had boys in the refuge. I mean, I've listened to her debating with Women's Aid, and she absolutely floored them on her way of thinking. And I just wonder, is it fear?
But she did argue, and I should say, that her point was that domestic violence is not a gendered issue. Her experience,
it's not, no.
completely opposite. And this didn't fly well with the prevalent view at the time. And she actually, I read her book there a while ago. She had her dog killed. I mean, somebody wrote it there as well. Her dog wound up dead as a threat, and her family was threatened. She had to have police outside her house for quite some time and received bomb threats.
3 years.
And had to leave the country in the end.
She had a terrible time.
Yeah, and continues, even to this day, arguing the same case, that this is not a gendered issue and that the solution will never be found if you look at only half the problem.
Well, here's what I'd like to just throw in before I'd ask each of you to give me a little wind-up from your own perspective and how you felt tonight went, etc., and where you'd like to see this go in the future. I'd love to have you all on again. I'd even love you to consider maybe, if you want to take a slot on the radio to discuss this issue on a continuous basis, because tonight the reason I wanted to have you on was to begin this debate and to get it going where people, would feel it was inclusive. So, I mean, we do have a call-in number, but 6 of you in the call tonight. I don't think it was reasonable to expect callers to come in too. With questions, comments, etc. But I'm happy to open up again to you as a group anytime, and I'm sure the other hosts on the radio will as well. But maybe you might even consider taking a permanent slot on the radio, maybe do a once-a-month broadcast or something like that. We'd be happy to facilitate that.
Once a day on drive time, perfect. Yeah, every single morning we'll be sprouting the same stuff to anyone who cares.
Well, it's just I just want you to know that when I say we're seeking solutions and we are available, it won't cost you anything. We provide everything you need, and I think this needs to be a regular conversation because we're clearly not going to resolve any of the issues as such tonight. I really just wanted to get the conversation going. I wanted to get people thinking about these topics along with all the other stuff we think about. And we do have genuine effective methods for dealing with debt and mortgage and credit cards and all of that stuff, and we've had success. And I think it would be complementary because I'm finding, particularly with suicides, there's suicides that are happening with family issues and financial issues, and they're shoehorned and locking into one another. And if we can even tease out some of that, I think literally will save lives. So if I could ask each of you maybe to if I start with David, maybe, and just...
It's very refreshing to talk to you. It's extraordinary because you are the first media person that I've come across who is prepared to take these issues seriously. It's extraordinary how silent the media has been over the last 10, 15, 20 years even in this country on men's issues. They have simply ignored them. And it may actually be that they are afraid of offending certain very powerful interest groups in the country. That may be part of it. But I'm certainly willing to be part of this endeavour.
Fantastic. Paul?
Yes, Vincent, thank you very much for the invitation to come back on. Yes, it's important that we get this discussion going, and it's a regular thing. There was a Pew research survey done in 2011 that shows that 91% of men believe being a father is important for them. 94% of women believe that being a mother is important to them. So, as I mentioned before, equal parenting mandate, which was introduced in the Canadian Parliament, introduced in Westminster, we need to introduce that in Dáil Éireann, so that in the event of separation and divorce, the children, in the best interest of the children, they have access to both parents, and both parents are involved in their upbringing, because that's vitally important for their emotional health.
Thank you very much.
Thank you once again, Vincent.
You're more than welcome. Anne, would you like to say something to finish up?
Yeah, first of all, I feel privileged to have been invited in this discussion. If there's anything I can do from here to promote and raise awareness, I've got huge issues around parental alienation. We need to raise awareness on parental alienation. This huge effects in family courts and on the lives of children. And yeah, if there's anything I can do, thank you so much for inviting me.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
42.
Hi, Vince. I'd like to echo what everybody else has said, and thank you very much for hosting this. It is really hard for anybody involved in men's rights to get anybody outside our own community to actually listen, and you're willing to bring this forward is brilliant. I'd love to be part of an ongoing discussion, and we can take items and get more depth in them. What I'll leave you with is why I personally campaign for men's rights. Baby boys being born every day. I want them to live, not just exist. And thank you for helping me in that progress.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Harry.
Thanks, like everyone else, thanks for having the thing and getting the discussion started. It's one of the most difficult things is to get the discussion started in the public sphere. And for anyone listening, it might have sounded very confused because of a wide range of issues and which are there. And as Anne was saying, doesn't seem to be an overriding umbrella for all of that, but it would we tie into an idea or a concept that men are human beings and not human doings. As Warren Farrell exposed in his book, The Myth of Male Power, and another lecture series that he has. And I think I'd agree with 42 that the whole point is that there's a whole new generation who will be seriously disadvantaged if a lot of these laws are enacted, and the society is made worse as a result. And it certainly isn't helping. So the more talking that's done, the more resolution will be arrived at, and hopefully we can push back or push things in the right direction. Hopefully, that's what my hope is anyway.
Absolutely,
and thanks again.
Just so everyone knows, I will send you all the podcast of this. Feel free to upload it to your YouTube channels. We'll put it on YouTube. We'll spread it everywhere. Feel free to join the site. And we have a forum, and I'll open a new section in there to deal with this very issue and encourage people to get involved. John, I think John was the guy I contacted first, so I think it's only right John should have the last word. So I hope his Skype is working.
Yeah, I'm finally, yes.
Good stuff.
Vin, thank you very much for the airtime. It's fantastic that somebody actually is taking note of what exactly is going on out there. It's so hard to get people to actually stop and think. If you actually change any of the adverts you see on TV, switch genders for 1 minute, you see what it is that men go through on a constant basis. We have plans for the future for more street protests. We'll be joining with other groups to do that. We'll be announcing all that sort of stuff onto the website. So if you go to menshumanrightsIreland.org, you'll see everything we do. We have a forum there for talking. Anybody who wants to contact us, please do so. info@menshumanrightsIreland.org. Vincent, again, thank you, and thank you to my friends.
No problem. It was an absolute pleasure having you on. For such a large group, you're also polite. Normally I have to fight with people to stop them talking over each other, you know. So, no, you're fantastic people, and I can actually tell by all of you, you actually care. Your intent is positive. Now, I know people in my chat box might be thinking, I may have let a lot of stuff slip as far as they're concerned. I mean, would have particular views maybe on the government and the constitutions and what's happening, etc., etc. And so what I'd like to say to the listeners is I want PIR to become more inclusive of other groups who are seeking solutions, and even if we only agree with 50%, 60%, 70%, I want to focus on the parts of the solutions and remedies that we see and the points we agree on, and I'd like to reinforce each other on those points. And I'd like to build on this.
So makes sense.
Makes sense.
That's really where we're at. And again, if we can help you, we're very happy to. I've already passed your link to your website to all the members, and I'm sure some of them will go over and check out your website and hopefully get to know a few of you and help out whenever they can. So maybe if we give it about 2 or 3 days of fair few things over the next few days, and if somebody wants to contact me from your group or your site, or maybe have a chat amongst yourselves to see who's willing to maybe take on a slot, weekly, monthly, whatever, we can sort that out, and we'll get it going, because tonight, as I said, I really just wanted to get the conversation going on this, and I felt from John, originally from the conversation that I had with him, that and your video, you're doers. You're people that get out there and do, and that's what we are too. We're doers. We don't just sit and talk and not do anything. We meet generally once a week, by the way, in Ardgillen Castle in North County Dublin. But we try to have the first Sunday of every month. We try to get as many members down as we can, and we just introduce each other, have a cup of coffee, and relax. It's not a meeting as such. It's just a meet and greet, and we sit and have a cup of coffee. All are welcome. So again, feel free to come along to that any time if you want to meet us.
Where is it again, Vince?
It's Ardgillen Castle in North County Dublin.
Ardgillen?
Yeah, I mean, there's a tea room there. We just usually meet in the tea room or outside. As I said, nothing formal, nothing organised. We just kind of show up usually from around 3 in the afternoon. and we just meet and talk, and we try to help each other out as best we can. There's no experts on this site, even though some will tell you they are. But we're just trying to do our best. We're just trying to help. That's really it.
That's what we're all there for.
Yeah.
Do our best, the best way we possibly can.
Well, look, thanks very much, folks, and I'm going to